Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on Episode 3 of Outlaw Star. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, Jean and Hilda, I believe her name was, are in a bit of a sticky situation because despite being on a space colony where the rule is no firearms for fear that you might puncture the hull, some pirates, I guess you would call them, were none too happy about essentially being told to kick rocks. And as a result of that, they have decided to sort of show up and exact retribution by force. In this case, in a sort of like mech suit. So things are going real great for Jean Starwind. But unfortunately, Melfina, who I believe is like the real point of interest here, she is guarded only by Jim. And while I don't think they've really found any trouble yet, I feel like it's really only a matter of time before things start to get interesting for them as well. So I guess we're just getting right into it. You know, this mech suit, presumably some sort of like utility vehicle, isn't strictly designed for combat, but if your opponent is unarmed, then it's better than just about anything else. So it's interesting that Jean just sort of disregards the rule about firearms, because sure, he claims these are paint bullets and therefore, you know, not able to puncture the hull, but he's actually using like a real firearm with what seem to be, you know, bullets with like the same sort of well, I guess like powder and munitions behind it. So like I guess it wouldn't have the piercing power of a normal bullet, but there's nothing to indicate that it wouldn't be, you know, somewhat as powerful. I mean, it's all kind of material, seeing as how the paint worked here, essentially goading the guy to get out of the suit and allowing him to be tased. So, Jean's also sort of figured out that maybe something else is going on here. Like, it seems like Hilda is at the center of a lot of trouble. You know, first it was those like Tau pirates, now it's these guys. I mean, I feel like having watched this before, albeit quite a few years ago, I feel like Melfina's really the one at the center of all this, although we don't necessarily know it yet. And I guess the other thing is, regarding Melfina, whether it's her or information she has, there's something sort of intrinsically valuable about her, but at this point it's not quite clear. What is clear is that a guy named McDougal is after them, and he's probably not a good dude. You know, at this point we don't have too much to go on beyond the word of a thug, but I mean, do you really need much more when some people break into your rooms to, well, essentially try and kill you? The only sort of saving grace here is that, the proprietors of this little space colony here, they are none too happy about people breaking the laws and rules here, so, you know, they've sort of sided with Gene and company. Alright, so that's something. You know, this little mention of the galactic ley line and how some people believe in it, some people don't. It kind of reminds me of the old film Treasure Planet in a weird kind of way. You know, because like ley lines, as I understand them, are sort of like, well, I guess lines on the Earth, and you know they sort of give off energy in specific places, and you know it can be harnessed to do stuff and all that. But the idea that there are ley lines on a galactic scale is, I guess, kind of interesting in its own right, because like the idea is, as I understand it, that people build buildings on ley lines to sort of harness the power. To do something on a galactic scale is quite something, you know? Because, like, who knows what one would do with a galaxy's worth of power like that. And, you know, I say it rhetorically, but on the other hand, I don't know what they intend to do with it either. I don't remember. So it seems like Gene and everyone have sort of latched onto the idea that it might be a good idea to get away from here, you know, just on the off chance that there are more people that want to cause you harm. I mean, it seems like it was pretty well founded given that there are now bogies on their tail. It kind of seems like a cruel joke that Gene, who's not really used to space travel yet, is just being thrust into the gunner's chair. Alright. You know, good on Jim for being willing to step up, because, like, it is an important thing, but I feel like you can't get someone who's only been on a spaceship once or twice to do something like that. Especially when Gene sort of intimates that, like, space travel's a bit of an uncomfortable thing. Although, on the other hand, it is kind of crummy that he's the only one not really doing anything. You know, Jim's in the gunner's chair, Malfina's operating the auxiliary controls. I mean, I feel like if you gotta be on a tin can rattling around outer space, I feel like I would want to be doing something rather than nothing, even if I can't, you know, actively, definitively save my own life, you know? Like, doing something's better than nothing. Although, unfortunately, for all the something they're doing, the lasers are proving ineffective thus far. You know, Hilda makes a point that, like, it's better to keep up fire on them, even if they are shielded, but I'm not sure about the wisdom of that, because, like, you know, if they know the weapons are ineffective, why should they really care? You know, there's no need to keep up evasive maneuvers if the enemy has no chance of shooting you down. Really, it seems like this whole thing is sort of asymmetrical in favor of the pirates, you know? Like, Hilda and her ship, like, they don't seem to be in a very good position to fight off these bogies, and, I mean, they don't really seem to be able to escape either. Well, I guess that's an interesting prospect, just trying to sort of evade rather than do anything deliberately. I guess that makes sense, you know, if there are a bunch of asteroids around, the best thing you can do is just focus on evading rather than fighting back, and I guess kind of hope that everyone else gets dashed on the asteroids. Oh dear, indeed. So, for another ship to be on a collision course with you, especially a much bigger ship, You know, that's serious business in space, and I feel like it's kind of incumbent upon the smaller ship to evade, right? So now we have Eijitan. And as I recall it, she's one of the recurring villains, I guess. You know, at this point in time, she's essentially the commander of a ship. You know, she has some station, and being a member of the Kataral Empire, she seems to be reasonably feared. So, on the one hand, she might scare off the people after Jim and crew, but on the other hand, you know, Hilda's picking a fight with them. And I feel like, you know, that's not a good idea. Like, Jim knows these people aren't to be messed with. You know, I feel like, despite playing this game of chicken here, like, Hilda's ship would not be the victor of a collision, you know? Like, sure, Aisha's ship might be damaged, but I feel like it wouldn't be totaled in the way that Hilda's ship would be. So I guess, amazingly, the game of chicken has worked. And, man, like, that's gotta rankle a little bit. Because, like, Jim mentioned the Kataral are like a cross between humans and tigers, and I feel like a slight of this magnitude is enough to certainly cause trouble in the future. You know, I say this knowing that Eijitan does indeed show up again. You know, this isn't a one-off encounter. But at the same time, you know, she seems to be a rather bellicose individual, just from how she's being presented here. I mean, granted, I imagine a lot of characters would be hard-pressed to maintain their composure perfectly. So it seems like this might have factored into Hilda's plan here. Essentially, by ticking off the Kataral, she's essentially banking on the fact that these other guys are willing to stand down when pressed. And, you know, she doesn't care. She's just willing to, you know, light speed warp away. And I guess, you know, there's a reasonable expectation that this is, I guess, a decent idea. You know, why would they dispatch a ship to chase after this small little cruiser, you know? So, like, you can kind of get away with slighting them as long as you keep a low profile afterwards. I guess the only thing is, you really do have to make sure that you evade all their fire. I mean, it is probably more difficult to shoot at a retreating ship than most other things, but, I don't know. I guess if you have to choose between this and certain death, it's probably a better idea to risk it, you know? So now Hilda mentions some friends in a neighboring star system. I'm not really sure if she's to be believed, seeing as how I seem to recall she decided, let's go to this space colony, it's, you know, a pretty good place to be. Like, that turned out not quite to be the truth of the matter. Ooh. So this is something. You know, even Eijitan knows Hilda by name. And, I don't know. That probably doesn't bode well for Gene and company. Ooh. So, Aisha's kinda going rogue, I guess. You know, or at least she's considering it. She wants to pursue Hilda, but orders are to remain in place, and clearly she does not appreciate these orders. The question is whether she's going to do anything about it, and to what effect, because, like, I get the feeling that at least some degree of her crew are going to be unwilling to disobey direct orders like they had received. And plus, it already seems like that helmsman was bypassing Aisha in the chain of command, which, doesn't really bode well for her continued command of the ship. Alright. So, there's a little bit more information. The ley line supposedly contains treasure, vast treasure, and the McDougalls are actually a pair of brothers who call themselves outlaws, sort of like not civilians but not pirates or law enforcement either. But, they seem to be rather piratical in temperament, They'll do any job for the right price, but any job often includes, more pirate-like things. Or at least that's the implication I'm picking up. So for the time being, things seem to have settled down. They're just heading towards their next destination, and space travel seems to be fairly simple and not fraught with danger. Although Hilda wants to go to a moon orbiting a planet rather than the planet itself. I feel like if you're avoiding a main population center, something isn't quite right here, It seems like it might be another shady kind of area. I mean, Hilda's hypothesizing that the person she came here to meet isn't here, and therefore something bad might have happened. And I guess the bad thing that may have happened is space combat, because this seems to be the wreckage of a ship. Alright, so if the person Hilda came to meet has been killed and his ship destroyed, then on the one hand it might just be incidental. On the other hand, it could be targeted. And I guess it is starting to seem targeted, seeing as how the vessel that was seemingly responsible is still here and is now launching an attack. So I guess whether they want it or not, Jean and company are getting involved in another little space dogfight. Ooh, the plot thickens. McDougal is helping these pirates. So I guess, there we go. For any price also includes helping pirates. So it's interesting that the pirates do have a sense of honor. To a degree. It's like, no, Mr. McDougal, you will not have to launch your ship. We're going to handle this now. They say that as they launch fighters and all that. So I guess, the question is, are the McDougalls experienced pilots? It seems like it, but, we kind of have yet to see. Alright, so Gene, poor guy's having a bit of a real one. He's not too keen on space, not too experienced with space, but like it or not, there are enemy fighters inbound and he's probably going to have to do something. Hilda's saying hey, hop in the gunner's chair, and I don't know, he says he's not going to be very accurate with his fire, but it's hard to say, if these fighters are anything like the vessels they were last fighting, then they're going to be shielded. And seeing as how the pilots of these fighters are also Tau sorcerers, I feel like things are going to get interesting one way or another. Hilda's even offering advice, don't use lasers, use missiles, but do we know how effective that's really going to be? I'm wondering if the idea is that Hilda assumes they're shielded and therefore lasers won't work. Because I feel like in terms of just hitting something and giving it minimal chance to evade, a laser's probably better given that it moves at the speed of light. Because, these ships certainly seem to be evading missiles pretty handily. Ooh. That's interesting. So Hilda's ship has been marked by their sorcery, sort of arcane tracking beacon. And though the fight appears to be dying down, this certainly isn't the end of things. They're going to be followed and probably ambushed again when they least expect it. So I guess the idea is Hilda's decided, alright, time to get out of here. We need to find that hidden ship I mentioned earlier. The hidden ship no doubt being the Outlaw Star. The titular ship and all that. Alright, so we get a little bit more interaction from Melfina. Just sort of wondering why she was brought along, and I guess the only real answer is because I figured you wouldn't want to be left with those outlaws. And fair enough. Alright, so the McDougalls and the pirates are parting company. The McDougalls having essentially completed their job. And I guess the pirates are just going off to, hunt down Melfina and take care of all that. The interesting thing is that the McDougalls seem to want to continue watching things and, keeping tabs on what's going on. Alright, so Aisha's having a rough go of things. Her superiors are basically saying look, you screwed up, you didn't catch Hilda, you are demoted. It's always good when you are forced to plead for mercy with a recorded message. That doesn't speak too well of Aisha Clan and her intellectual capacity, but what are you gonna do? She seems to have been thoroughly thrashed by her superiors, and she really only has herself to blame, although I'm sure she'd rather shift the blame to Hilda. Ooh. So Hilda's decided to sail real close to a sun. Now that's kind of interesting. That's where the Outlaw Star is presumably hidden, but man, that's a really interesting place to hide something. I guess no one would stumble upon it accidentally. At least, not anyone likely to live to tell about it. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.